carry me back to old Virginia. Carry me back.
Welcome back to the Virginia History Podcast. In the last episode, I detailed how Spain had gotten involved in the area that had become known as Virginia. In this episode, I'm going to continue to lay the foundation upon which the future British colonial system in Virginia was built. The English were relative latecomers in the exploration game, as their only claim to the New World lay with the Genoese explorer Giovanni Caboto, better known by his anglicized name John Cabot, whose 1497 expedition landed in Newfoundland under Henry VII's reign. But the English did not really follow up on John Cabot's claim. Within a few years, other European nations were fishing along Newfoundland's coasts. Henry VII's son, Henry VIII, often called the father of the Royal Navy, seemed interested in the New World after he assumed England's throne. Certainly the idea of using the Royal Navy to explore the Americas was in Henry's mind throughout his reign. Aiding those thoughts was Sir Thomas More, whose Utopia was inspired by Amerigo Vespucci's South American accounts. More was also somewhat influential in shaping another man's exploration attempts. The printer, lawyer, author John Rastell, Thomas More's brother-in-law, was the other person influenced by the English philosopher-statesman. Rastell caught the exploration bug in 1516, the same year that More's Utopia was published, when he led an expedition that was to take him into the Americas. Rastell bungled the affair, which saw his fleet travel only as far as Cork, Ireland. Though a failure, Rastell did not give up trying to install English claims in the New World, as he took up his pen and wrote plays such as A New Interlude and A Mary of the Nature of the Four Elements, which boasted of the New World's great natural resources. Other minor ventures were undertaken during Henry VIII's reign, but his continental and marital troubles eventually overshadowed any and all exploration intentions. Henry's oldest son, Edward, and oldest daughter, Mary, had reigns that were mired by sickness and political intrigue to such an extent over a short period of time that nothing materialized during their reigns on England's throne. In fact, England seems to have almost entirely stopped looking westward during this period, as the Flemish wool market promised to make the English merchants richer than any New World expedition could offer. Those opinions would last well into Elizabeth I's early reign. But as rivalry with Spain heated up, England once again began looking across the Atlantic. The man seemingly most influential in changing at least Elizabeth's mind about the New World was her astrologer, Dr. John Dee, who in 1580 offered two treatises describing geographical details that fired the English mind into thinking that a great and powerful empire was possible. Before 1580, the English had attempted to reach Cathay through the Muscovy Company's eastern treks, which all ended in failure. Now the Crown, certainly under John Dee's influence, looked westward for a northwest passage, as had a small handful of other Englishmen. Elizabeth relied upon those private efforts to lead the New World exploration, especially a young upstart that soon rose through English courtly ranks and into Elizabeth's circle of favorites. Walter Raleigh not only had the funds to support such expeditions, but he also had the ambition needed to propose such, at that time, foolish adventures. Raleigh, though the most notable exploring name under Elizabeth's reign, was not the first to undertake missions westward. In fact, he wasn't even the first from his own family to attempt exploration. Raleigh was the half-brother of another great explorer, Sir Humphrey Gilbert, who was a pioneer in English exploration. Humphrey Gilbert's rise to fame came by way of Ireland, where he was installed as the governor of Ulster and became instrumental in the English plantation system, which was an attempt to resettle land taken from native Irish inhabitants and replace them with Protestant English settlers. His actions, especially in southern Ireland, led to the uprisings and rebellions that had to be put down by the English crown. Not content with his newly acquired status, Gilbert served as a member of Parliament in 1571 to 1572 before he set out to aid the Dutch sea beggars in their struggle against the Spanish, though that mission was largely unsuccessful. After the Dutch debacle, Gilbert returned his attention to writing and alchemy. His work eventually crossed paths with Sir Thomas Gresham, as both men were attempting to advance various academic pursuits. After 6 years of this more sedentary lifestyle, Gilbert turned his attention to the sea. In 1576, Gilbert was instrumental in raising money, as well as support for a first expedition westward in search of the fabled Northwest Passage. As a result of Gilbert's work, Martin Frobisher was commissioned through the Muscovy Company to lead 3 ships across the Atlantic, one of which, however, sank en route. The other 2 explored regions that today are part of Newfoundland and now bear Frobisher's name, such as Frobisher Bay. Other than discovering what would eventually be revealed as iron pyrite and an Inuit native, the mission was a failure. The Inuit even caught a cold and died before reaching England. 2 other ventures into the region would also be financed, but both failed to discover the sought-after Northwest Passage or the golden treasure boasted of in the Spanish Main. In 1578, Gilbert launched another expedition which comprised 7 ships. Among these ships, Walter Raleigh was along for the voyage. The voyage extended from Plymouth, England, westward in an attempt to prove Gilbert's theory that a Northwest Passage to Cathay existed. A northern Atlantic storm, however, wreaked havoc on the fleet and caused them all to turn back to England. Before Gilbert could attempt another excursion, he was called back into the Crown service to handle another Irish uprising. Yet this time, Gilbert's competence was called into question as a Spanish fleet evaded his gaze, and Gilbert's actions in port proved to be excessively violent. By 1583, the patent license granted to the Muscovy Company was nearing term, and Gilbert set about raising money through Catholic investors who were promised land to resettle in the New World. Gilbert's attempt failed, but he still set sail with 5 ships under his command anyway. This voyage would prove to be the most disastrous of Gilbert's life. The 5 vessels, loaded with many settlers, started the adventure in June 1583. One of the ships, which was the bark Raleigh, was owned and financed by Gilbert's half-brother Walter Raleigh. The bark Raleigh, however, did not make the voyage across the Atlantic due to lack of supplies and returned to England soon after disembarking. The remaining 4 vessels continued their voyage across the Atlantic and reached Newfoundland by August 1583. There they were met by an international fishing fleet that was at first hostile to Gilbert. Gilbert would eventually break the fishing fleet blockade by standing out in the open while waving the English royal letters patent and declaring that Newfoundland was now in English possession. After the blockade lifted, he took formal possession on August 5th, but did not establish a colony as planned, because many of the settlers became ill from the voyage or began to desert the expedition upon arrival. Humphrey therefore was forced to load a ship with the ill and send it back to England. Undaunted, Humphrey tried to persevere through his setbacks and explore the surrounding region, but time, supplies, and his crew were all against him. He was forced to sail back to England without much to show for his efforts. During the voyage back to England in late August, early September 1583, another ship in Gilbert's fleet ran aground and sank, before a powerful storm unleashed fury on the remaining 2 ships. Gilbert's ship, the Squirrel, was said to be too small and overburdened to handle the tempest, which proved to be true. The crew in the Golden Hind, the other vessel, attempted to persuade Gilbert to leave the Squirrel and come aboard their safer ship, but Gilbert refused. By nightfall, the Squirrel's lights were no longer seen, and the Golden Hind spotters reported that the general was cast away. The last time Humphrey Gilbert was seen, he was sitting aboard the deck of the Tossing Squirrel, reading perhaps Sir Thomas More's Utopia, because he quoted, "We are as near to heaven by sea as by land," words which were very similar to another passage in the famous work. Gilbert was lost at sea, but he had left a mark on English colonialism, as had Thomas More. Walter Raleigh would soon pick up that shattered legacy and launch expeditions of his own within 3 years of Gilbert's death. Thus, it is against this backdrop that English colonialism in the New World began. Sadly, Raleigh would fare no better than his half-brother, as we shall see in upcoming episodes. For more information, please visit my website at vahistorypodcast.com. In addition to the Virginia History Podcast website, I've created a Facebook page where additional information can be found. Finally, the podcast can be followed on iTunes and Stitcher platforms. Please subscribe.
Mas tudo bate despedido do Zé, mas